Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a recent, highly charged Sky News Australia panel discussion. We're going to impartially unpack their critique of the Australian media landscape. They made some pretty intense allegations about structural bias and narrative manipulation. So, we're going to look strictly at the arguments and the exact evidence they presented to build their case against major outlets like The Guardian and the ABC. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. The entire Sky News discussion really hinges on this one fascinating question. Does the media tell us what to think, or do they just subtly tell us how to look at certain subjects? You see, the commentators argue that bias isn't always just in the words written on a page. Sometimes it's literally baked right into the visual presentation and the internal editorial culture of the networks themselves.
Here's our roadmap for The Explainer. First, we'll analyze the media bias allegations, then look at visual manipulation at The Guardian, followed by the Hanson backfire effect. After that, we'll check out editorial orthodoxy at the ABC, the Pickering retraction, and finally, echo chambers and audiences.
Starting off with Part 1, Visual Manipulation at The Guardian.
The Sky News panel hones right in on a video published to The Guardian's very own social media accounts. Just look at the stark contrast they highlight here. On one side, the panel points out a Guardian photographer describing their approach to shooting right-wing politician Pauline Hanson, and their stated goal was deliberately aiming for a sinister, shadowy tone. But then, contrast that with the other side. It's the exact same photographer's approach to capturing images of ISIS brides, where the stated goal was actually to foster human connection, raw emotion, and empathy. The panel argues this reveals a conscious, heavily biased editorial choice, basically actively trying to bring one subject down while generating sympathy for another.
To really back up this claim, the Sky News panel cites a direct quote from The Guardian's picture editors regarding that Hanson photograph. They said, "If we're looking for something that says sinister, he's done a bang-up job." According to the panel, this essentially proves the visual tone wasn't just some accident. It wasn't just a product of the environment they were shooting in. No, it was deliberately manufactured to match a specific, predetermined editorial headline that cast the politician in a negative light. Now, what's genuinely fascinating here is the actual mechanical technique the panel breaks down. To achieve this quote-unquote sinister look, the photographer utilized a technique called directional light. Instead of using soft, flattering lighting like most portrait photographers would, they placed a speedlight directly underneath Pauline Hanson's face. If you've ever held a flashlight under your chin while telling a ghost story around a campfire, well, you know exactly what this does. It instantly creates these harsh, dark, upward cast shadows, completely altering the subject's appearance to make them look inherently ominous.
Moving on to Part 2, the Hanson backfire effect.
So the panel doesn't just stop at the photography technique. They ask why this might actually be a massive miscalculation by the media outlet. They argue this attempt at visual manipulation creates a severe backfire effect. By trying to manufacture a sinister image of a populist politician, they actually end up validating the core narrative of Hanson's supporters, which is that the elite media class mocks them. Because Hanson's brand is so heavily built on being a brutally authentic outsider fighting the establishment, this kind of media attack just plays perfectly into her hands. It essentially does her marketing for her. It's a really interesting point about how these tactics can completely backfire.
Next up, Part 3, editorial orthodoxy at the ABC. Transitioning away from visual manipulation, the panel turns its attention to allegations of strict ideological conformity. They map out this rapid, almost whiplash-inducing sequence of events involving ABC star Charlie Pickering. First, Pickering was interviewed outside an ABC protest, where he explicitly stated that the network's hiring of prominent advocate Grace Tame was problematic. Second, there was an immediate and severe public backlash against him for bucking the supposed left-wing orthodoxy. And third, shortly after that backlash, Pickering appeared on an ABC broadcast to issue a full retraction, seemingly denying the reality of his original interview. To establish the baseline here, the panel actually plays Pickering's exact initial statement from that protest. When he was asked about Grace Tame, he was remarkably clear. He said, "I do actually think it's problematic. That's my personal opinion." The commentators really emphasize that this wasn't just a slip of the tongue, it was a calm, direct statement of his personal stance before any institutional or public pressure hit him.
Which brings us to Part 4, the Pickering retraction.
Now look closely at how drastically Pickering's narrative shifted once that pressure mounted. So the crucial point is the sheer contrast in his follow-up statement. On his ABC broadcast, he stated, "Unfortunately, I was ambushed by a known provocateur and pressed into a conversation that was not planned." He went on to assert that suggesting he was against Grace Tame was a complete misrepresentation. The Sky News panel highlights this to show what they believe is just a staggering reversal from his on-camera recorded opinion from just days prior. In fact, the commentators go so far as to characterize Pickering's subsequent broadcast as a hostage video. Now, this is their specific term, and they use it to describe a retraction that looks incredibly forced and completely denies the established, recorded reality simply because the speakers stepped out of line with the accepted ideological orthodoxy of their employer and their audience. The panel then rigorously deconstructs Pickering's defense. On one hand, you have Pickering's claim of being ambushed and backed into a corner, but on the other hand, the panel presents their counter-evidence. They point out that the whole interaction is actually available on a 2-hour live stream. It was a completely civil conversation. It happened in a wide-open public space. And perhaps most tellingly, Pickering was holding his own phone the entire time, seemingly recording the interaction himself. They argue this evidence completely shatters the narrative that he was somehow forced or pressured into stating his original opinion. And finally, Part 5, Echo Chambers and Audiences. Bringing both of these distinct case studies together really illustrates the panel's overarching thesis. As summarized by commentator Mia Schlicht, organizations like the ABC champion all forms of diversity, except when it comes to diversity of opinion and thought. And this brilliantly illustrates their point. The panel uses the Pickering incident to suggest that the moment a journalist steps outside the accepted narrative, the institutional backlash is so severe that it literally forces them to publicly contradict their own recorded reality. Which leaves us with a highly provocative question from the panel's analysis. When media outlets attempt to heavily control the visual or ideological narrative, do they actually risk alienating their audience and doing the marketing for the exact figures they oppose? It's a fascinating lens on the mechanics of media influence, right? So the next time you see a remarkably sinister news photo or watch a really swift public retraction, ask yourself, what narrative is actually being engineered here? Thanks for joining this explainer. We'll see you next time.